If you're in the market for a new Apple Mac computer, it can be a little bit challenging because there are so many makes and models and sizes and screens and gigabyte choices. You don't really know where to start. Well, in this week's video, I'm going to be breaking down all the details and helping you decide which Mac is right for you, because it's actually just gotten a little bit harder because Apple have actually added the M3 to go with their M1 and M2 lineup of computers. So if you don't know your minis from your studios, your Airs from your Pros, you've come to the right place. This week's Studio Live Today podcast will be all about that. My name is Pete Johns. This is Studio Live Today and our weekly podcast. If you'd like to subscribe, you can head to studiolivetoday.com/podcast or just head to studiolivetoday.com for all of the details that you may need. A couple of quick things right up front. We're going to be looking at apple.com here. We're going to be talking in US dollars when we talk about prices. So if you're in the UK or Canada or Australia or New Zealand or anywhere else, you'll have to do a little bit of converting for your own prices, usually up, especially for our friends here in Australia. And I did want to point you to the easiest place to get comparisons, and some of the places we'll be looking here. So if you tap on the Mac or click on the Mac over at apple.com, you'll notice that there's this one here, this compare option. If you're watching the video version, you'll see it. If you're listening on audio, go to apple.com, click Mac, then click compare, and you can actually compare 3 different models. So you've got the complete lineup, the complete range of Apple Macs there, including a lot of legacy ones. So if you're running an older Mac and you're considering a newer Mac, yeah, you can go and check that out as well. So head over to apple.com, click on the Mac button, and then click compare, and you'll have a lot of stuff there that you can take a look at. Also, if you'd like all the details about the latest Apple event, but you don't have a heap of time, I've got a 1-minute overview that tells you all about the new M3 Max. That'll be linked down in the description if you're watching here on YouTube, or just head over to studiolivetoday.com and search Pete Johns Apple event. You'll find all the details there. Let's dive in and start talking about the choices that you'll need to make if you're diving in to a new Mac computer. What are some of the things you need to consider? Well, there are some things like screen size, power, storage, memory, ports, screen quality, external displays. Do you want a laptop or a desktop? There's a heap to actually consider here. So we're going to take it step by step. So your 2 biggest options right up front are a laptop or a desktop. Now, Apple have got 2 different types of laptops and 3 different types of desktop computers. They have the MacBook Air, which is their entry level, their cheapest MacBook, and they've got the MacBook Pro, which is the one that's just been released. So if you're looking for something that's pretty simple and maybe your budget's a little lower, the MacBook Air is going to be where you're going to be looking, or the MacBook Pro if you want some more power. And there are different flavors of Pro. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Over on the desktop side, the Mac Mini is the most basic of all Macs. It starts at $599 US for a fairly basic kind of configuration. This is what I use to this very day, the old school one with the M1 chip. So even the ones you can buy now are cheaper than what I paid for mine, and they're pretty darn good. You've also then got your Mac Studio, which is a newer version that has additional ports and a little bit more power. It's saying here a true powerhouse over on the Apple webpage. And you even have the Mac Pro, which, as it states, is for the more pro users. And yes, it does look like, it's the one that looks like a cheese grater for those listening on the audio version if you go over to the Apple website. So let's say you're deciding on a laptop. Let's talk about laptops to start with. So screen size is the first important choice that you need to go for. And there are a multitude of choices here. If you go for the MacBook Air, they come in 13-inch and 15-inch. So you get a smaller and a larger screen. If you're going for the MacBook Pro, it's going to be 14 inches or 16 inches. So you've got everything from 13 inches up to 16 inches, 2 versions on the lower end and 2 versions on the higher end. Now, this will depend on whether you plan to use your laptop on the go more than having it tethered at home or plugged into an external monitor at home. So if your portability is what you're after, the MacBook Air 13-inch is definitely your cheapest option. If we come in here and take a look and spec out the MacBook Air here, the base level 13-inch MacBook starts at $999 with the M1 chip and $1099 with the M2 chip. So if you want to get started, and here's the little secret, dirty little secret about all these. The M1, the very lowest end for $999 or $599 for the Mac Mini, is great. And it will do what a lot of people want to do. Even if you're using things like GarageBand and Logic Pro and even Final Cut Pro, if you're at that higher end, you kind of know that you are. And if you don't think you're going to need much more than that, you may want to go for something at the lower end. So the 13-inch there, or if you don't need all the performance, but you want something with a bigger screen size, the MacBook Air 15-inch might be for you, and that one starts at $12.99 and $14.99 as well. What do I like? Well, personally, I'm a bit of a fan of the 14-inch MacBook Pro. I think it's just the right size for a good combination of portability and having a decent screen size as well. And the MacBook Pros actually have a slightly higher quality screen. They've got the XDR display. So if you want that really good quality screen, MacBook Pro may be something to consider, but you are going to pay for it because the MacBook Pro starts from $15.99 now, or $19.99 really, and we'll get to that in a minute when we start talking about more things. Second of all is power, and yeah, the difference here is you're going to go the MacBook Air if you are using it for things like web browsing, for documents, for consuming media, for even if you're a GarageBand or Logic Pro user and you're not using like thousands of plugins and 4K and 8K video, the MacBook Air is going to be fine. The MacBook Pro has the power if you are going to do some professional workflow, and it does have things like the ability to have additional memory and additional storage. And it's also got now with the M3, it's got the M3, the M3 Pro, and the M3 Max options in there. So you can spec it out. I spec'd out the maximum one and it was up over $7,000. So if money is no object and you want a 16-inch MacBook Pro laptop with M3 Max, yeah, you can get all that. But again, the sweet spot there is probably around the middle mark there, around $19.99 up to $24.99 for a very powerful computer. And if you're a Logic Pro creator, GarageBand, Final Cut Pro, the M3 Pro is probably that sweet spot that you'll be looking for. We'll do some comparisons at the end of the show as well. Storage. Let's talk about storage, shall we? Because this is super important. And to look at storage, we're going to jump over here to the compare. We're going to come and compare some different models here. So it's by default, it's put up here the MacBook Air 15-inch M2, the MacBook Pro 14-inch M3, and the 16-inch M3. So kind of the three new flagship models. And if we scroll on down, for those watching on the video version, there's a couple of storage things that we need to look at here. In fact, we'll bundle these together, storage and memory. So storage is the amount of space you have to save files locally. Now, you may be aware that if you're using a Mac or if you've used iPads and iPhones, you have things like iCloud Drive storage. You can store it in the cloud. You can use Dropbox. You can use Google Drive. You can use other ways to store your files, but you do want to be able to have some storage on board. Now, a lot of these devices start at either 256 or 512 megabytes. I don't recommend going that low. Reason being is that, especially if you're doing things with audio and video, you probably want at least a terabyte, so 1 TB of storage. Now, in the case of your MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro 14-inch, they have up to 2 terabytes of storage, and the MacBook Pros have up to 8 terabytes of storage. But you are going to pay quite a bit for that. To me, the sweet spot, if I'm going to recommend something to you, is between 1 and 2 terabytes. If you've got the budget to go to 4 or 8, more power to you, but 1 or 2 is good. Anything less than 1 terabytes on the storage side, I would strongly advise against unless your budget is super duper tight, in which case you can go a little less there. In fact, it used to be the case that you'd just go with lower storage and then just plug in external drives. And you can still do that, but you're not going to get the speed on those drives, and it's a pain in the bum, especially if you're using things like GarageBand and Logic Pro, to have all your storage externally. The related thing here is going to be your memory. And here you can see, if you're looking at the video version, that 24 gigabytes is the maximum amount of memory. So you can have 8, 16, or 24 on the lower end MacBooks and MacBook Pros. And the upper end, you can have up to 128 gigabytes of memory. So memory is your short-term storage. If your storage is the stuff that you store your stuff in, think of your storage as your filing cabinet, and think of your memory as your brain. You can keep a little bit of stuff in your brain, but you're obviously constantly refreshing it, and you're not going to store stuff long-term in there, especially if you've got a brain like mine. So you want to file it away in the long-term storage, and that's where having additional storage is going to help you out. So I would recommend at least 16 gigabytes of RAM or memory. You can have up to 24 gigabytes if you've got the budget for it. Anything above that, you'll know if you need. If you need 64 or 128, you are a pro using things like Final Cut Pro and like 4 to 8 streams of 8K video, or you're on Logic Pro and you're using all the plugins at 128 tracks at once, then yeah, maybe you'll need a little extra. But yeah, for the majority of folks, 16 is the sweet spot. So I would go 1 terabyte and 16 for most users. Anything less than that, I think you might be backing yourself into a corner and not future-proofing yourself. Anything more than that, you're probably paying a premium for stuff you won't need. But what's your opinion on this? If you're watching the premiere of this podcast, or if you're listening to the podcast, or if you're watching the replay of this one, let me know in the comments what you would spec out and your recommendation based on what you would like to get or what you already have. Let's talk about ports. That's an important thing. You've got to plug your stuff into your things or your things into your stuff. So the ports, what you actually have to plug your stuff into, and here on they don't consider it as important, obviously, as I do, because there's not as much information. It's right down the bottom on the Apple website. But I think that especially for a creator, I don't know about you, but I plug a lot of stuff into my Macs and my computers in general. So here's what you've got to consider. Your MacBook Air has 2 Thunderbolt slash USB 4 ports. Nothing else. No USB-A, no HDMI port, and no SD card slot. So if you're a creator, if you want to make sure you have HDMI out to go to a monitor or to send a signal out, or you want to be able to have additional ports, up to 3 Thunderbolt ports, then you will need to go the higher end. The same deal is on the MacBook Pro, the low-end MacBook Pro, but it does have the HDMI and the SD card slot. The highest end MacBook Pro adds an additional Thunderbolt port, and all of these are actually these days using the MagSafe charging. So gone are the days that you have to use one of those USB-C ports for your power. That's all separate. So you will have 2 ports there ready to go. But yeah, no USB-A ports on here. So if you've got older gear, you'll need to be living the dongle life or using hubs or the like to actually connect stuff up. So consider that, and we'll talk ports again. We'll go through all of this again with the desktop. So if you want to hear more about the port stuff, desktop has more ports, and we'll go into more detail with that then. The screen quality, I alluded to it before. Not only is there the screen size, but there is the screen quality, what they call the display. So in terms of the display, they all use a liquid retina display, but the higher end laptops use what's called an XDR display, which is extended dynamic range, I believe. Someone will correct me with that if that's not correct. So you get higher resolution screen. So for instance, even though it's smaller, even though it's 14 inch, it's 3024 by 1964 pixels on the 14 inch, and even higher pixel density on the 16 inch. Whereas your MacBook Pro, your MacBook Air, your lower end MacBook, is only 2880 by 1864. Now that's still good. Don't get me wrong, those liquid retina displays on the MacBook Airs are amazing, but they're not quite as amazing. They don't have quite the brightness or quite the dark blacks that you're going to get if you use something like the MacBook Pro. And as someone who I had a MacBook Pro 14-inch, the M1 Pro model, on loan from Apple, which I did have to give back. I'm hoping to get myself one of these new M3s to actually have for myself, as opposed to a loaner in the future, but it is great. The screens on those things are amazing, and these are basically the same screens as when they redesigned those models. Now, the observant among you may have realized that there's something weird going on here, and that is that this new MacBook 14-inch Pro M3 wasn't available before. Now, what Apple said is that they've reduced the price of the entry-level MacBook Pro 14-inch from $1999 to $1599, which is technically correct. The best kind of correct. It's technically correct. However, there's a small issue with that, and that is that I haven't really done that because it doesn't use the Pro chip. It's just using the M3 chip. So it's more comparable to the old 13-inch MacBook Pro, the one with the touch bar, the one nobody liked, which has been discontinued. So don't be too fooled. I know it sounds like it's a good deal, and it still is, for $1599 for that MacBook Pro 14-inch with just the M3, not the M3 Pro. But you're really getting, apart from that screen, you're not getting a whole lot of extra over and above the MacBook Air. You are getting the M3 chip, but that's about it. M3 chip and screen are the only things there. You're not getting the Pro or the Max chip. Let's pause here quickly to talk about, because we talked about the power really briefly before, about whether you'd want the M1 or the M2 or the M3, whether you want a MacBook Air or MacBook Pro. The chips that they've had over the last 4 years have gone from M1 to M2 to M3. But with each of those different chips, they've also added a Pro, a Max, and an Ultra. We'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to the desktops, but just keep that in mind that an M1 Pro or M1 Max is probably faster than an M2, and an M2 Pro or M2 Max or M2 Ultra is still probably faster overall than an M3. So don't be fooled by the numbers. Numbers don't mean everything. The last thing I wanted to talk about here with laptops is the external displays. So if, like me, you like running some external displays, keep in mind that the MacBook Air will only have support for one external displays. Your lower end MacBook Pros can have the screen and 2 additional displays, which would be great for me because I have 2 monitors, and then you can use the display as well. And your higher end ones have up to 4 displays. So the way that works is the M3 chip has only the one extra chip. The M2 chip and the M3, you can have 1 extra display. The M3 Pro, you can have those 2 extra displays. The M3 Max, you can have 4 additional displays. So if external displays, monitors that you can see your work on, especially if you're using like Logic Pro, Final Cut Pro, GarageBand, you want those multiple monitors to have your lyrics there and your mixer there and then your interface. You may want to consider that the MacBook Air may look appealing, but then you go to try and plug in that second monitor and it doesn't work, you're going to be disappointed. So keep that in mind. Before we move to desktops, let's just go shopping and show you what I would actually do right now in terms of these models. So if we go to the MacBook Air to start with, this is if we wanted something on the budget side. I would actually jump in here. We're going to hit the buy button for those playing along at home if you want to play along on the Apple website. So you've got 3 options here. So your screen size is completely up to you. The M1 chip, as I mentioned before, if you're really using your computer for some basic stuff or even some higher end stuff, because like I mentioned, I still use an M1 chip. It's actually a really good deal at the moment, $999 for the oldest currently sold computer. In fact, one of the only computers still being sold with the M1 is the MacBook Air M1. If you want to go to the M2, it is only $100 more for the base model, which comes with 8 gigabytes of memory and 256 gig of storage. But what did we say? What did we say about the memory and the storage? I would recommend updating that a little bit. So my configuration would be closer to the higher end one, which has an 8-core CPU and a 10-core GPU. Don't worry if that means nothing to you. With 8 gigabytes of memory and 512 gigabytes of storage, that's $1,399. Now that would be passable, and again, if budget is tight, that would be a good machine. You'd have to do a little bit of juggling. You wouldn't be able to run thousands of plugins all at once with only 8 gigabytes of memory, and 512 gigabytes of storage will fill up pretty quickly. So what I would actually recommend, if you do have the additional budget and you wanted to go for something, I would actually upgrade the memory. For $200 more, you can get 16 gigabytes of memory, and for $200 more, you can get 1 terabyte of storage. So for $17.99 US, you're going to get a 13-inch MacBook Air in the midnight blue. Be careful of the fingerprints, maybe go the silver. And you can get yourself a pretty darn good machine for $17.99. If you want to go higher end and you definitely want the MacBook Pro, what would I recommend for the MacBook Pro? Well, let's order one. Let's order one now. They start at $15.99 US, as I mentioned before. The size is going to be up to you. I like the 14-inch. The 16-inch is just too big. I'm someone that loves to throw my backpack on and go out and about. 16-inch laptops are just a little big, in my opinion, for doing that. But if you like the bigger size, knock yourself out. So you got the 3 selections. You got the M3, the M3 Pro, or the M3 Max chip. The M3 is good, but to me, not good enough, not more good enough than the MacBook Air to justify. So I would go the M3 Pro. If I'm buying one for me right now, I'd go the M3 Pro. Now, I think that the 18 gigabytes of unified storage and of unified memory and the 512 gigabytes of storage is okay, but this one here, the second option, which has 12-core CPU, 18-core GPU, 18 gigs of memory, and 1 terabytes of storage by default for $23.99, I think that's your best buy right now. Yes, it's nearly 2.5 grand for a laptop, but this is going to future-proof yourself. 24. I don't know that I've got anything in my arsenal that I can throw at a processor, throw at a computer that's going to use 18 gigabytes of memory at once. Terabyte of storage is plenty. 14-inch liquid retina display. You got the USB-C power adapter. This one has the 3 Thunderbolt ports. So because we go on the upgraded model, you get 3 Thunderbolt ports. You got your HDMI, you got your SD card, headphone jack, and that MagSafe port as well. So that's kind of the happy place. Because remember, we can spec these up to 7.5 grand, but I think for $2,399, if I was buying myself, if I wanted a computer for the next 5 years right now, and I kind of do, this is likely what I'm going to go for. So there's your laptops, your Mac laptops in 2023. Every question you may have had, hopefully answered here. Do you have other questions though? Guess what? We can be interactive here. You can leave them in the comments if you're on the video version. You can head over to studiolivetoday.com to find out all the ways you can get in touch with me if you would like to after this video. Should we talk desktops? Let's talk desktops here. So when it comes to desktops, Macs have 3 different options. In fact, they have 4. So many options, right? So your first option, your first choice in the choose your own adventure of Mac is, do you want an all-in-one computer like the iMac, or do you want a computer that is separate and then plug into your own monitor, your own screen, your own separate screen? Now, there's pros and cons, there's benefits and drawbacks. The iMac has just been updated with the new M3 chip. It's actually a really nice machine, and you don't have to worry about the screen. You get a built-in 4.5K Retina display. You just don't even have to give it a second thought. It's sleek, it's slick, it looks good. You can stick it in your living room. You've got 7 different colors. The family's going to be happy, and everyone wins. Or do they? Because the benefits are great, but the drawback is you can't ever change it. So, and look, the spoiler alert here, upgradability is not a strong point of these Mac desktops for any of them, and we'll talk about that as we go through all the different models here. But your main advantage is also a bit of a drawback, is that if something goes wrong with the screen, you can't use your computer because the screen and the computer are all in one. And if something goes wrong with the computer, the screen likewise. So you are kind of stuck with that all-in-one. That all being said, these things start at $1,299. Pretty good deal. Pretty good computer for a pretty good price compared to those laptops we were looking at before. So if you don't need the portability, if I was just setting up something to have at home, would I get a MacBook Air and pay all that extra premium for the screen? As we saw, it was going to cost like $17.99 to get a good setup. Or would I spend that same or even less and get myself a nice 24-inch screen that I can use at home? It really depends on whether you need the portability or not. So you'll probably know, you'll probably be looking at these if you go to apple.com or thinking about this as I'm talking about it, and you'll know in your mind and in your heart and in your soul whether an all-in-one computer is for you. I've never owned one, and I probably never will, because I like the flexibility. Like I said, I'm a multiple screen guy. I like to have my 2 monitors set up so that I've always got a lot of screen real estate, and having the, even though you can attach one extra display, it's a little bit clunky when it's all built into that one display as well. So that is your first option, is the iMac. You've then got 3 different desktop options. Count them, 3. You've got your Mac Mini, you've got your Mac Studio, and you've got your Mac Pro. Now, the Mac Mini is going to be for most people. The folks who want or need a Mac Studio or a Mac Pro kind of know that they need a Mac Studio or a Mac Pro, and you're probably not the people that are watching or listening to this podcast right now. So let's start with the Mac Mini. It has been updated to the M2 processor now. It starts at a mere $599. Warning on that price, that's your very base configuration that we'll have a look at when we do the comparison in just a jiffy. But it is a really good, it's a powerhouse. I'm running the original Mac Mini M1 with the minimum specs that I don't recommend because I took the pain so you don't have to, and it's been running great. I still love it, I still use it, I still recommend it. When I replace it, will I go with a lot more internal storage and memory? Yes, I will. It's why I haven't replaced it yet. I'm actually saving up so that when I do buy a new Mac Mini or maybe a Mac Studio, I'll have enough to actually increase the storage and the memory. Let's go to our next Mac, and it is indeed the Mac Studio, which is like it's an extender. It's like you've extruded a Mac Mini and just pushed it up. So the Mac Studio, and when we start talking about the differences here, when we do our comparison, you'll see why you might want this, because it's all about the additional ports. If you're someone that's doing video or audio on a very serious level, you may want more ports, you may want more power, you'll want more storage, you want more memory, you want the faster chip. All of that is capable with the Mac Studio. Starts at $19.99, looks kind of cute, even though it's a little bit weird with its elongated view. But for those looking at the video, or if you go over to check out Mac Studio on apple.com, ports out the wazoo. Extensive connectivity is what it says. See, I say ports out the wazoo, and Apple say extensive connectivity. It's just a different way of how we talk. And then there's Pro, and then there's Pro, and then there's more. No, and then there's Pro, the Mac Pro. Now, we got a bit of a surprise when this was announced recently, because the old Mac Pro was the last of the Macs that hadn't been updated to even M1. So when we got the M2 Mac Pro, all the pros were very happy because it's using the M2 Ultra, which is the most powerful and capable chip ever, and still is. Here's the thing, despite the fact we've got M3, M3 Pro, and M3 Max now, a M2 Ultra is basically like two M2 Maxes stuck together. So it's still going to be faster than the M3 and probably faster than the M3 Pro and M3 Max because it is Ultra. Those watching the video have already probably done a spit take of their coffee because you're seeing on the screen there that it says from $6,999, which is why we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about the Pro. Because if you're a Pro and you need the Pro, you're going to buy the Pro. The main advantages of the Pro is that it's got more space in the case, meaning that you can add external cards, things like video input and output. So if you're running like a TV studio or a multi-channel streaming network, you can actually add those additional cards. None of the other Macs actually have any upgradability, any ability to add additional cards. So if you want the Mac Pro, if you need the Mac Pro, you're going to get the Mac Pro. But the vast majority of creators sitting in your bedroom studio, your home studio, your living room at home, watching and listening to me right now, you're probably not going out and buying a Mac Pro. Let's do some comparisons, shall we? Let's go shopping while we talk about the different options. So I've already said all-in-one or separate. So are you going to go an iMac, or are you going to go a Mac Mini or a Mac Studio? They're really the options that you've got here. So we're now going to talk in terms of all the other things that we did before: the power, the storage, the memory, the ports, the displays, and it's going to be a bit quicker. If you think I missed anything here, go back and watch or listen to the laptop chatter, but I will try and cover most of the same things here in case you didn't, because I know what it's like. There'll be timestamps. You might have clicked through and you want to hear all the details. So let's grab the iMac to start with. Now, you will notice if you go over to apple.com that there are two flavors of the iMac, the 2-port and the 4-port. And if you go for the 2-port, it is going to be from $12.99. That's to get that price point in there. If you go the 4-port, suddenly it's $14.99. Does have some additional specs on there, but I would actually go the 4-port. Personally, I have too much stuff to plug in to have just 2 ports on my computer. That would be my webcam and my audio interface, and then I'd go to plug my mixer in and I'd instantly be in dongle country. So I would always go the 4-port, and given that I'm talking to mostly creators on this video, I would imagine I'm going to suggest the 4-port. So we're going to start with that one at the $14.99. We're then going to grab the Mac Mini, which comes in M2 or M2 Pro configurations at the moment, which is up from the M1 that I actually run. And then we're going to look at the Mac Studio. So we're going to come down and find the Mac Studio. Now, the Mac Studio has the M2 Max or the M2 Ultra. So that is why your Mac Studio is going to cost a lot more than your Mac Mini. And again, I almost wasn't going to include it here because if you need the Mac Studio, you probably know you need it. But if you're going to spec out a Mac Mini anyway, maybe the Mac Studio might be a better buy for you. So let's have a look at some of the different options here. Let's talk about power to start with. So your iMac running the M3. Now this is where it's going to get a little confusing, and this is why I said before Just keep in mind that the M3 is not necessarily going to be faster than the M2 Pro Max or Ultra, because your iMac, the brand new M3 iMac, which is the only one of these desktops upgraded to M3, has an 8-core CPU and a 10-core GPU. You compare that to the up to 12-core and up to 19-core, and then up to 24-core and up to 76-core. Well, that just really depends on how you configure these. So do keep that do keep that in mind when you're looking at these. So even though it looks less impressive on the M3, remember that that's up to. It's like when you're buying a car and it's like from $29,999, and you're like, oh, on-road costs and this and that and dealer delivery and blah, 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 blah. So just keep that in mind. Your memory situation is similar to your laptops here. So you've got up to 24 gigabytes of memory, unified memory, which is, I didn't really explain this before, but that's memory shared between your graphics processing and your CPU. So it's everything. It's your graphics and your main computer processing that is going to be using that memory, which is different from PCs and other things which actually have separate discrete memory. Apple Silicon kind of just make all this work. I talk about that in more detail in other videos, or if you've got questions about it, let me know. So you got up to 24 gigabytes, up to 32 gigabytes with the Mac Mini, and up to a whopping 192 gigabytes on the Mac Studio if you need to go completely nuts. You've got up to 2 terabytes of storage on your iMac, and up to 8 terabytes on your other Macs. So again, it's really showing you here that as soon as you want to start expanding the capability and the capacity of your power and of your storage, that's where you probably need to go. Because the iMac is very much here it is. Here's the iMac. You're not going to really configure your iMac to have different options there. So keep that in mind if you are shopping around for your desktop. The ports, we've already kind of talked about, but let's go down to Port Town. Now, display we don't have to talk about because, yes, the display on the iMac is very nice, but you ain't getting a display. You're going to have to buy your own, and there's a heap of options there. Pretty much any sort of 4K display these days is going to be good. If you want the 4.5K display, you'll have to buy Apple Studio Display, or there is, I think, one Dell display that's 4.5K as well. Yeah, look, it depends. If you're doing proper video editing with color correction and all the rest, you'll know what you need and you'll go buy it. Let's look at these ports. On the iMac, you've got 2 Thunderbolt/USB 4 ports. You've got 2 USB 3 ports, and you've got your gigabit Ethernet. So the difference here is you get those 2 additional ports, but they're USB 3, so they're your old A style ports, which for me is fine. I still got gear. I can still plug my mixer and my webcam in using those, and then still have the 2 Thunderbolt or USB ports if I needed them. On your Mac Mini, you've got 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports or 4 Thunderbolt 4 ports. So similar to what we talked about on the laptops, on the M2 model, you've got the 2 Thunderbolt ports because it supports those 2 channels of Thunderbolt. And on your M2 Pro, you've got 4 Thunderbolt ports. So if you've got a bunch of gear that you want to plug in and use, the M2 Pro is going to be better for you. You've got 2 USB-A ports on all of them, and you've got an HDMI port as well as gigabit Ethernet. And you're very similar sort of setups here for your Studio, if you're going to go with that. So that is where we're at. That is your main choices here when it comes to a Mac. But let's go shopping again. Let's buy a Mac Mini, because to me, as a creator, your Mac Mini is your most capable and flexible machine that you may want to consider. It's not going to break the bank. You got the flexibility to scope it and to spec it how you like, and then you can plug it into 1 or 2 of your favorite displays, or more depending on the type you go for, and you're ready to create. So let's go shopping. I'm going to hit the buy button here. Remember, these are all in US American Freedom Eagle dollars, what we're talking about here. So your base model is $599, but it comes with 8 gigabytes and 256 gigabytes. And if you've been listening to anything I've been saying for the last half an hour, you will know that I think that is not enough, and you will need more than that. So I would recommend speccing that up. Your next model up there for $799. Now we're getting somewhere. That's got the 512 of SD storage, and the next one up, which is the M2 Pro, has 16 gigabytes of memory, 512 gigabytes of storage, and is using the M2 Pro. So let's assume you don't need the Pro. You're not going to be doing Pro high-level stuff, but you still want a capable machine. We're going to select the middle option for now because we want something that's still pretty good. We are going to add the extra memory to go up to 16 gigabyte, which is my recommendation. We are going to add the 1 terabyte of storage to go up to that. That's all we need to add, and we're only at $1,199. Now, look, I know I'm not naive enough to know that 1,200 clams is not still decent chowder. Did I just make a weird clam chowder reference? For a lot of folks, for myself included, it's why I'm still saving my money, saving my mussels. Oh, wow, saving my fish. No, okay, I'm losing it now. That's why I'm still saving, because I want to actually go. And you may even want to go a little higher. Maybe you want to future proof yourself, go up to 24 gigabytes of memory, maybe go to 2 terabyte storage. So you can go up to $17.99 on this, but I think the sweet spot for the vast majority of people is going to be that $11.99 machine where you get an M2 Pro, you get 16 gigabytes of memory, and you get a terabyte of storage. I think that's a pretty good deal. You got your Apple trade into if you want to go with something like that, if you've got an old Mac. So that is a good option for you. Let's go back now and select the M2 Pro. So this is going to start at $12.99, and that's going to be for your 512 of storage and your 16 gigabytes of memory. Now, as we've mentioned before, you'll want to upgrade that storage most likely to go to at least a terabyte, which is going to bring your cost up to $14.99. Still a great price for a great little piece of hardware. So $14.99 for your M2 Pro, the powerful chip that you've got there. You've got your same 16 gig and 1 terabyte, and it's only $300 more. Is that something that I would recommend to give you that little bit of additional power that you might need? Yeah, if you've got the budget to do that and you want to future-proof yourself, I would definitely consider going with the Mac Mini M2 Pro. Do keep in mind, however, if you're buying right now, in November of 2023, we more than likely have a refresh of these Mac Minis and Mac Studios to the M3 coming in the next 6 months or so. So maybe you want to just hold off just for a jiffy. Let's now dive in and assume that money is no object and you'd really like to check out the extruded dude, the stretchy outy Mac Studio. Well, let's jump in and buy one, shall we? Let's not talk about it. Let's buy one. We want all those ports. We want all that power. You got two options here. One starts at $19.99. One starts at $39.99. Now, for the vast majority of folks, I'm reckoning you're probably starting at the lower end. It's basically whether you want the Max or the Ultra. If you want, again, the Ultra is for people who know that they want the Ultra and who probably need the Ultra. The Max is going to be an absolute powerhouse for the vast majority of people. So that's what we're going to spec out here. This is kind of my dream machine. Obviously, I love an Ultra, but the M2 Max Studio is kind of what I think I want. By default, it comes with 32 gigabytes of memory and 512 of SD storage. I really wish that they would increase the base storage because we're going to have to add to that. So again, if we went in here and added the 1 terabyte of storage or up to 1 terabyte, $21.99, or you know what, if you've got this sort of powerhouse, you'd probably want 2 terabytes of storage, $25.99. So that's your 32 gigabytes of memory and your 2 terabytes of storage. Now, as we talked about before, you've got a lot of options here. With this version, you can go up to 64 gigabytes, or if you go to the higher end, Ultra, you can go up to 192 gigabytes of storage, and you can go all the way up to 8 terabytes of storage there, memory and storage. So yeah, you've got options there. Again, $29.99. Obviously, you double the price of your Mini. If you're using all of that extra power and all of that extra requirements, then hey, it might be money well spent. If you're running a business, or if you're doing 3D model rendering, or if you're doing high-end studio work and you're running hundreds of tracks in Logic Pro, this may be a great machine for you. But again, my recommendation, if I'm a creator, say I'm creating in Logic Pro, I'm doing a little light video editing in Final Cut Pro, or even if I'm just a GarageBand user, the Mac Mini is kind of my go-to. To me, that is the sweet spot, is the Mac Mini of around that $1,000 mark for a middle of the range Mac Mini, slightly specced out. I think you're going to be really happy with something like that. Now, keep in mind, you do have to add a monitor on top of that. I get it, but you can get decent quality monitors, 4K monitors, for $200, $300 these days. So I don't think that's a complete deal breaker there, but do keep it in mind. What do you think? Is this simplified things, or has this made things more confusing? One final thing that I did want to mention to you, in fact, a couple of things. Number one is if you are in the market to buy any gear, including a new Mac or an iPad or an iPhone or any audio gear for your studio, head to studiolivetoday.com/gear. Check out my gear guide. I've got a complete list of all the gear I use in the home studio. Those are affiliate links, meaning if you make a purchase, you pay the same amount, but they break off a chunk and send it my way. The other thing I did want to mention here is that you can also grab some good deals on refurbished Macs or second-hand Macs. I would recommend, however, that you shop from somewhere reputable. You can often jump in here online and sometimes they have them, sometimes they don't. You can actually jump in here and find some refurbished Macs and MacBooks and other options in here. You can also go to the Mac store, the Apple store, and sometimes they have discounts on older models. Or you can go to places like Amazon or eBay. I would stick away from things like marketplaces and buying from places you've never heard of. You just don't know the history and you don't know the return policy of that place. So do be careful. If you go to the gear guide, I've got links only to places that I know are reputable, that I know folks have used and have got good experiences with and have rights to return if things go wrong, because you hope they don't, but sometimes they do. It's just the way it goes. So that is it for this one. If you are in the market for a Mac, hopefully this gave you a little bit of information, some of the options that you have right now to choose from. If you're listening to this podcast, go to your podcatcher of choice and let me know what you thought. Leave a review. 5 stars are always appreciated, and let other folks know that they can come and check out the podcast. If you're watching the video version, a thumbs up down below, thumbs up, guns up, is always appreciated, and leave your comments, questions and feedback down in the comments section as well. Go to studiolivetoday.com for a whole bunch more about creating on iPad, iPhone and Mac. And as we say at the end of each and every show, please be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and keep creating. I'll see you next time.